Chisholm. Barb is a fifth-generation Belgian and very proud of it. She grew up in the suburb of Brussels and is a 1964 graduate of Southern Door High School. You may recognize her as being the nurse in the emergency room who always wore her nurse's cap. After retiring from the hospital after 47 years, thank you, she became very involved in spreading the history of her Belgian ancestors. She does presentations on the Great Fire of 1871, of which her ancestors survived. However, today's presentation will be all about the small roadside chapels that dot Door, Brown, and Kewaunee counties. There are presently approximately 30 of these chapels, with more being built. And each one has a unique story behind it, and all are either dedicated to the Blessed Virgin or some other saint. But they are largely built as a thanksgiving for a particular prayer that's been granted. So she is here today. Please help me welcome her to talk about move your chairs around so you can see a little bit better. We have some glare on the screen, but it's not too bad. Feel free to move around. There's still food. So if you're, want a little piece of pie, go help yourself to that as well. Thank you.
I'm going to have to keep in mind, I pace my talk. It's like being on a leash here, I don't want to go so far. Also, besides being a graduate of Southern Door, some of you probably didn't know that Brussels had a high school. I went 2 years to Brussels and then 2 years to Southern Door. Sometimes people go, huh? They had a high school? Yeah, we did. It was a lot of fun too. I love spreading my Belgian heritage. Like she said, I'm fifth generation, and my grandfather lived with us, our family, and nothing made me happier than to sit around him in his rocking chair, next to his rocking chair, and have him tell me stories about the old days. And so I got quite a few of them from him. This is all through, through research though. And before you leave, I do have brochures here that say Belgian roadside chapels. They have the address in it. There's a map on the back. They have GPS coordinates, so you can punch it into your GPS. Pay attention. Most of them are open to the public, but next to not the description, it's just the name, there's either an OP or an LP or private. Some of them are private. They don't want people. It's strictly for family. The LP is limited access, and that is, I can get you into most of those. I would say a good 75% are open to the public. Not during the winter time though. In fact, they're probably still closed now. Usually opens in May and then goes through the end of October. So you're welcome to take one per family unit though. So there'll be enough. I also have brochures on the Belgian Heritage Center. That's who I represent. That's who all my presentations, all the donations go to that for my speaking. It is a converted old church. It was, for those of you that didn't know, it was the founding place of the Norbertine Fathers in the United States. They had their first mission in our center, and then they went on to, of course, establish St. Norbert's College. So they started there. It was decommissioned in 2000 and stayed dormant for 10 years. We took it over in 2010 and has made it into, I believe, a very nice heritage center. We are expanding a little bit. We took over a convent school, which is also on the campus. It is open to the public, but as of right now, it's not wheelchair access. That's going to be one of our campaigns to raise funds to be wheelchair accessible. So there are those brochures there. Okay, enough of that. Now we're going to go on to tell you about the roadside chapels. These are some of them are little buildings that you probably have seen that dot the countryside. They are in Dorr, Brown, and Kewaunee County. The real old ones look like privies. If you would know better, you would think that that's what they are.
You should get the knock that it's not, because it usually has a cross on the top. So that should probably tell you it's not a privet. They all are located in the homestead, in the farmstead, but close to the road. That is the purpose of having, back when travel wasn't by car, when people would be walking or riding horse or buckboards, anybody could stop in and use the chapel for a moment of prayer. Way back when, the woods was dense and churches were far spaced apart, so people had these little roadside chapels so that they could go in and say a silent prayer. This particular one is dedicated to Our Lady of the Lourdes. Like Amy said, lots of them are dedicated to the Blessed Virgin. The Blessed Virgin has the Belgians have a real love for the Blessed Virgin, or a particular saint that probably they prayed to for a certain affliction to be cured or something to that effect. This particular chapel is located in Heritage Hill. It was originally in the Duval area, and it was built, most of them were built the late 1800s, early 1900s, a few scattered after that, but that was the largest building of these. This was a custom that was brought over from Belgium. Belgium has a lot of chapels also. They're not necessarily roadside chapels, so they pop up all over. And they're usually made of brick or some type of stone. And they don't have really doors, they have metal gates in front of them. And they too are donated, not donated, they are designated to a certain saint. This particular one was built because Mr. Durain, Joseph Durain from Duval, a little 14-year-old, was diagnosed with incurable cancer. And the family decided that to help him out, they would build a chapel. While they were building the chapel, the child became better. A brother went over to Belgium and brought over a large statue. I don't know what happened to that statue. It's not in this particular chapel anymore. This is the inside of that chapel. This is an old one. You can tell it has predominantly a three-tiered or two-tiered altar. You walk in the door, and right across is usually the saint that is represented, or the Blessed Virgin, the main thought that you are coming in to pray for. Also, the old ones have, and this has been diluted. It's not much shown anymore, but whatever was put on the left side was put on the right side. So if there's a candle on this side, it was over on that side. If there's a statue of the Blessed Virgin on this side, there had to be on that side. The idea was so that your eye was led to the main representative of this particular chapel. And you can see it at the Heritage Hill in the Belgian settlement area that the Heritage Hill has. This one is one of my favorites. It's St. Anthony Padua, and this is a little harder to get to. This is on UWGB campus. It is, you have to know where to go. You have to follow a path through, one way goes through the campus area. The other one you can come off of Bay Settlement Road. This particular chapel was built by the Lemieux family. The Lemieux family's homestead was in this part of UWGB. UWGB bought their land, and one of the conditions was that they had to maintain or keep the chapel open. This chapel is dedicated to St. Anthony Padua, which is a patron saint of the lost. But Mrs. O'Deal built it because she was in failing health and she wanted a place to pray. And she couldn't make it anymore to the church in Bay Settlement. And one of her sons was studying to be a priest, so he needed a place to pray when he would come home to the farm. And so she petitioned her husband to build this chapel. The limestone was from it's on a cliff. It's in front of a cliff. The limestone was taken from that area, and her brother was a carpenter, so they built this chapel. She wanted it to be different, and it is different because there aren't many stone chapels. I'll show you the inside. Well, I love the windows. There are 8 windows. The roof of the chapel has wood beams on it. This is the saint that it's dedicated to. And there's also a small grotto with the Blessed Virgin close to the chapel. A couple of times it had to be closed because of vandalism. And but it's open 3/4 of the time. Of course, this is the chapel, and I say that with a great love. It is the Our Lady of Good Help Chapel in Robinsonville. It is where a little Belgian girl, Adele Bryce, saw an apparition of the Blessed Virgin. 1859, I believe. She saw her 3 times, and they built the church over on the left-hand side, well, it's your right hand, I guess, side, over the site. The apparition chapel is underneath that, and it's a real place of peace. It's just a nice place to go and meditate and say a few prayers, because it's right over the site where the Blessed Virgin appeared. That big brick building with all the windows is the boarding house. Adele would board Belgian children or anybody that wanted to make their first communion, and were probably from poor families. They could come here and board and stay. And if you go way over on the other side is, that low brick building, it's the Welcome Center. So it tells you a little bit about what you're going to see. This was a place where Belgians came in pilgrimages, especially on the 15th of August. We would come, and behind the church is a procession area that you go around, and we would say the rosary with a statue of the Blessed Virgin held up on young shoulders. Of course, this is a site of a miracle. When the Great Fire went through this area, the settlers rushed to the chapel, and the fire approached. It went up to the gates of the chapel, split, and went out the other side. The chapel grounds remained untouched. And this is a little roadside chapel on the grounds of the chapel. It is to represent to the tourists and so forth what these little roadside chapels were. It's called St. Therese Chapel, but I don't know much more about it. This is the inside. If you see that upper little, what do I want to say, picture or whatever, it's actually a little chest, and it was in lots of Belgian homes. The bottom part flips open, and all the things that a family would need to say the last rites when the priest comes over would be in those. Lots of homes had those. We had one. They're usually in the bedrooms. This one is St. Martin's. It's in Thanet. And Thanet is Flemish. There you go, you got a bout of Flemish. This is largely a Flemish area. And it has a little roadside chapel and a cemetery. If you would happen to go there and you pull into the parking lot of the church, and the church is no longer there. It was taken over by someone when in the 60s when all these churches combined, and they never did anything with it. This is the second chapel. The first chapel was in the cemetery a little bit further, but it slowly was settling into the ground. They didn't have a slab of cement underneath, and so it slowly was disintegrating. So they built this one, and it is a nice little chapel. That's the inside. The statue on your left side, I believe, is St. Martin, and that was the patron saint of the church. In fact, Thanet was called Martinsonville at one time. It actually was supposed to be called, the little village was supposed to be called Jeannette. For the settlers there, the Jeannettes. But the person who registered it in the state mistook the J for a T, and so it became Thanet. It was dedicated to World War I, not dedicated to it, but it was in hopes that all the people and the young men that went to the war in World War I would come back safely. The original one was built in 1914. Everyone came back safely. So this is a plaque with the names of the people that went and returned. This little chapel is on the way to the chapel. It's a pure lot chapel, and it's open to the public, but I say that with tongue in cheek because that door always sticks. It's really hard to get in. It was dedicated to the Blessed Virgin, and this gentleman, the Pure Lots, who had it originally, he was chopping ice for ice harvest in the wintertime, and he went in, and he thought he was going to drown. And so he prayed to the Blessed Virgin and said, I will build you a chapel, and that's what he did. He built a chapel. And that's the inside of it. This one is St. Odile of Thier Dames. There's another play on words. Thier was the first settler. Dames was the priest that convinced the settlers to come to Robinsonville or Champion way back when the first ones came over in 1853. This is a chapel that was built after their church got decommissioned. And they took that St. Odile, that stained glass above the door, is from the church, and they were very clever. The chapel actually isn't as big as what it looks. They put the back part for storing their lawnmowers and whatever else they wanted to do. So, and this is the inside of that chapel. The pews are from the original church. The statue that you can barely see was on the altar. It is kept up very nice. That's a statue. The stained glass was also from their church. This one is the Walloon Shrine of St. Hubert, All Saints Chapel. This chapel is built, this is a relatively new one, greater scheme. It's built in 2010 by Cletus Bellum. Cletus was a well-known person in the Walloon area. He could speak Walloon fluently. He could sing in Walloon. He was well-known in Europe. He had a band, and they traveled around Europe singing and playing and having a good time, I would imagine. St. Hubert's is the church where he belonged in Rosaire. This one was built in 2010. I think it was done in November and he died in December or something like that. He never really got to enjoy the fact that he had his chapel. It is now, this is one of the chapels that you either have to call and try to get the relative to open, or if you have a group together, I have a key, I could get in there, but I don't do it for just one person because I live in Sturgeon, Maine. This is way over in Lincoln. This is the inside, the part of the inside. The whole chapel has little nicks and crevices that he picked up statues of different saints in his travels, and the walls are completely covered with these. That means statue is St. Hubert. He rescued that from the St. Hubert's in Rosaire. The priest, Father Becker, at that time had a real want to clear up all these statues. He was throwing that away. And Cletus rescued it and brought it and put it in his chapel. That also is one of those thick call boxes. What? Shadow box? Yeah, like thick shadow box. That would fit it right up in the top, and that was brought over from Belgium by the Belgian. This is Our Lady of the Afflicted. It is typical also of the first chapels that were built. It was moved here from the original site. The original site was not far from, I would say, the chapel, which I mean the one in Robinsonville. It was Mr. Cushart built it. He would go, he got some leg affliction, and he had to walk with crutches. So he would go to the chapel and pray. And one of the times he decided that he didn't need his crutches anymore. So he left his crutches at the chapel and proceeded to walk back home. There are crutches that are left at the chapel that they're displayed, some of them, from people that got cured. My mother always would show me a set of crutches, and she said, "I'm sure this is my sister." Her sister had polio. She said, "I'm sure those are her crutches." And she walked with a limp, but she walked. That's the inside. It's very plain. Father Becker again. This was apparently, according to history, was quite ornate. It was, the walls were painted and so forth. Well, he didn't like that. So he stripped everything and made it very plain. One of the parishioners came back after Father left for a different parish and brought a beautiful silver crucifix, which I don't have a picture of. That's on the side. That was in the original one. This is also to St. Anthony of Padua. This is in Lincoln, right across from Kinnard Farms. This is the old one. The new one was built because this one was getting deteriorated. And it is a sort of a sad story. St. Anthony of Padua, the little prayer is, "St. Anthony, let me put my eyes on it." And the family of the Loose family, Looze, had lost their little 5-year-old boy. He had wandered away or somehow was lost. And they petitioned the saint to help them find their little son. Well, they found him, but it was 5 years later when they recovered a body from Lake Michigan near Algoma. And so regardless of the fact that it wasn't the way they wanted to find him, they did find him so they could bury him in their family plot. And they proceeded to have this. And that's the inside. This also, well, maybe the new doors don't stick. This one's stuck also. Here's St. Donat's Chapel. This one was, this is one of the few stone chapels. This is one of my favorite because it's one of the oldest chapels in all the chapels that were built. It was built around, right after the Peshko fire, so 1872 or so. And it is on a farmstead. It's on the de Villers. Was originally de Villers, I believe, and the Massards own it now because the de Villers girl married a Massard, and they live down the road, so they combined the two. And it is the patron saint of protection from storms. This is what it looked like at one time. It had an outdoor oven in the back, and so that was taken off. Just the front part stayed. That's the inside. It's neat because of it looks like it did probably. The wood is not planed. It's just neat. And these are the windows. I always have people, I say, look at those windows. Look at how deep the window wells are. You could go in there in a storm and feel very safe. And Mrs. Massart did just that. When storms were coming, she would go in there and pray. It also was, and I find this a little interesting, I read in a book, it was after the Great Fire, and that was hopefully to protect them from another fire happening. This is a very plain chapel. It's on the cemetery at St. Hubert's. It's St. Peregrine, the protection from cancer. If people go there, if they have cancer, and pray that St. Peregrine will help them. But there's no statue there. They couldn't find a statue of St. Peregrine. So a picture was painted by one of the parishioners, and that's in the back of the church. This one is St. Jude. St. Jude is a LaGrave, was a family that did it. It was built in 1878, in the 1880s. Apparently in 1878, a diphtheria epidemic went through the area. And several of the LaGrave children died from diphtheria. They built a chapel in hopes that prayed to St. Jude would keep the illness away. This is not the original chapel. The first one deteriorated and they built this one. Apparently they buried the children around the chapel. They couldn't bring them, and because I had a relative too, the same thing. That day and age, you didn't transfer the bodies because they didn't know how diphtheria was really spread. And so one of the ways they thought to keep it from spreading was to bury people that were afflicted with diphtheria and had died from it, bury them in the middle of the night. Apparently the night air, quote unquote, didn't spread the disease. And so there are several children that were buried around the chapel. When it was rebuilt, they moved it up away from the road because it's really, because chapels were built so close to the road, lots of them became obsolete by snowplows, or they had to move them because the roads were widening, that type of thing. And so that's why they had to move that one. And now the graves of the LaGraves are in front of the chapel. That's the inside. This is a very old cemetery, St. Francis de Paul Cemetery. That's in Duval. That's the little chapel that's there. That was moved from one of the farmers, moved to this area. It is dedicated to St. Hubert. And that's the inside. That crucifix that's in the main, that you see there, is the only thing that remains from the first church. The first church, quote unquote, became arson, I believe. They think it burned because of mysterious circumstances, so I don't know what that means. And that's the only thing that survived, was the crucifix. And so they put it in this chapel. It is open to the public. You can go in. The outside, this is the Stations of the Cross in the chapel. This is a new one. Our Mother of Perpetual Help. It's new in the fact of this building, but it's the lineage lends to an older building. It was built for Mr. Baldwin, and he was in very poor health. And they decided to build a chapel, hopefully, that would help his health, and it did. He recovered and lived to age 70. And they sold it to family members, and it was moved to Jaden Farm. Okay, here's my, that's the inside. Here's my neck of the woods. This is in Missouri. A big bird between Brussels and Rosaire. There's nothing there anymore except the cemetery. This is the statue of St. Michael. The church there was St. Michael's Catholic Church. It was raised when I was in nursing school, in the 60s, I would think. And the statue became property of my father. This statue was given to the church by my great aunt, nun, who received money from her father when he died. And since she was a nun and had a vow of poverty, she couldn't keep the money. So she bought a statue, St. Michael's, and one of the Sacred Heart. That statue is approximately where it was on the altar, in the area. Now, I'll tell you a little side note. This statue was in our home. After the church came down, Dad didn't know what to do with the statue, so he brought it home. He put it in one of our bedrooms. Okay, here I am, a teenage girl, getting ready for school or a date, running around in my brown underpants, and I thought, oh my God, I went and put a pillowcase over his head. I couldn't imagine someone seeing me like that. My brother said the same thing. He said he used to come home from the, back then 18-year-old bars, and if he had a few much to drink, he said he never slept in that room because he figured St. Michael was watching. When the homestead was sold, our family had to do something with St. Michael, obviously, so we got together and built this grotto for him. That statue is over 100 years old, and it's out in the elements. It's now beginning to deteriorate a little bit, but it's not too bad. That's the cemetery, and that's a little chapel that's on the cemetery that's dedicated to St. Chisholm. St. Chisholm is a patron saint for small children from illnesses, basically. Chisholm, by the way, is a common name in Belgium. It translates to Jolene in English and Jewel for the male, but it's St. Chisholm. And the Flamel family had two children that had died of convulsions. And Mrs. Flamel was pregnant again, and she wanted healthy children, so they said they would build a chapel in St. Chisholm's honor, and if they would have healthy children, and she did. She went on to have 2 healthy children, 2 to 3, I believe, and the chapel was built. That's the inside of this chapel. I started to take care of it, so I tried very hard to keep things the same on both sides, so it was really like it used to be. Another thing about the chapels, usually the walls are adorned with certificates, the real old ones, baptismal certificates, marriage certificates, things like that. It's sort of like a family Bible would have all of these important notations in. Well, if there's a certificate, they were put on the walls there. This is Our Lady Queen of Peace Chapel. It's not your typical chapel. It is connected to the ladies' garage. And she had a home for the elderly. And so she wanted a place for them to pray, and so she built a chapel. She's also a survivor of cancer times two. So she's very much dedicated to the Blessed Virgin. This is the inside. As you can see, it's not like your regular chapels. She went on to get the different things from different churches. A lot of these when the churches were decommissioned and they were up for auction, people would buy the stuff. The main resurrection is from St. Francis de Paul in Duval. The altar cloth and the missal and so forth are from St. Michael's. Everything has its purpose and where it came from. She's a neat lady. And that's also another one that if you want to go in, you can knock on the door, and if she's home, she'll let you in. It was open to the public until her and her husband came home and found someone trying to steal that big statue of the Blessed Virgin. They had her down and was walking off with it, and then they saw him coming and they let it drop. And that's an expensive statue. This is those three little statues on the side. Father Becker also throwing those away. Those were resurrected. This is St. Mary's of the Snow. This is a new chapel. It was built in 2011, I think. That's a baptismal fount in it. It is largely repurposed or articles from our Heritage Center, because our Heritage Center was St. Mary's of the Snow. And so this is an Engelbert statue. And it's really pretty inside. It is a very nice little chapel. Here's another Bodwin chapel. This is on County DK. And it was built on the original Bodwin farm. You guys have all gone by when you used to go to Green Bay. This great, big, beautiful stone house. And it also had a chapel there. Well, the chapel deteriorated, and I believe I read somewhere, which I'm not sure, that they built a chapel as Thanksgiving for making it across the ocean when they came over. And so they built a chapel. That chapel deteriorated, and they built one across the road, which was also owned by Bodwins. And that chapel, I believe, deteriorated also, and this one was built. It had to be moved a little bit further because there the road was widened. This is a neat chapel in that it is all, you can see the three-tiered chapel. This one has a lot of certificates on walls. This one, the St. Roch Chapel, it's behind our Heritage Center. It's dedicated to protection from pandemics. It was used a lot during COVID. People would come here and pray, and the local priest would say rosaries there. That's the inside. This one is dedicated, it's right across from St. Francis Xavier Church. A little chapel of the Sacred Heart. It's also an Engelbert chapel. And it was built in memory of their daughter who was killed in a snowmobile accident. It was one of the first snowmobile accidents in the county. That's the inside. And here's the grotto, St. Francis Church. It was Father Glaudermans was a very well-known priest in the area. He wanted to build a grotto to look like the Lourdes grotto in France. It has a little waterfall, which the Lourdes grotto has. It was supposed to be his crypt. It has his name inscribed in part of the cement, but the abbey or whoever was his boss at the time said you couldn't be buried there, so he is not buried there. He's buried with the rest of the priests. The stones were brought over from the parishioners. He asked the parishioners to go and find the most beautiful stones on their property. And if you know Door County has lots of beautiful stones. Apparently they had a lot left over. But this is built, and there's little nicks and cracks all the way around. This is almost like who's who in Brussels at that time, because there's a lot of local names. This one's interesting. This is a pier one. This is a new one also. A chapel of the Holy Family. It's dedicated to his family. He had an original stained glass made for this. There's a stained glass. In case the faces of the Blessed Virgin and St. Joe's don't look right, it's because it's supposedly the pictures are of his parents. Go figure, I don't know. And otherwise, that chapel is from, I think, St. Francis. This is also another one of my favorites. It's St. Odile Chapel. It is built of limestone. Mr. Destry was the person that had it. He was a mason. He had some lime mixed to do some work, and he got some in his eye. And he was afraid he was going to be losing his eyesight. And so he prayed to St. Odile, which is a patron saint of eyesight or renewing eyesight. And it became good, and his eyesight was renewed. And so he built this chapel. An interesting little thing along, I don't know, about in the 60s, apparently the chapel was deteriorating. So they took every stone, chipped off the mortar on it, and numbered them, and then put them all back, sort of like they do at Heritage Hill. Well, on the side there, you see a little bit of the table on this side. They had one stone left over. They didn't know what to do with it. So they put it on a little table and they put a sign there. We know this belongs here, we just don't know where. So that's it. This is the brand new one. Just opened in 2022. Another Engelbert. The people that built this one, Janice wanted to dedicate the chapel to a Belgian saint. So it's St. Juliana of Liège. This is the door. I thought it was stained glass. It's not. It's fused glass onto wood. And it's beautiful. This is the inside. All of the parts were repurposed from the Engelbert family or from the churches nearby. The altar is from the Duval church, and she said it wasn't 4 parts. Her sons put them together, and interestingly enough, the altar was originally plaster and horsehair, and they redid that. The stained glass was from this spiritualist church. They got that and built it. It's also open to the public. If you go there, though, don't be alarmed. You're not going on their property. It looks like you would be trespassing, but you're not. They said it's open to the public. That's pretty much it, except for, this is the one that really gets me. It's called the Ghost Chapel. I just found this out a little, maybe 2-3 months ago. I thought it was really neat. It's a merchant, an Edmund merchant from Dysel. And it was a chapel that was on Highway 57. The legend says that Edmund was thinking that he was going to get money from his uncle in Belgium when his uncle died so that he could use it to fix his farm here. Well, his uncle died, and his uncle left all his money to the priest. Did not make Edmund very happy. So he decided he was going to go put a curse on the priest. So he went to put a curse on the priest, and guess what? It backfired. He got cursed instead. And so he went home and all strange things started happening. Furniture started moving. Animals looked like they had human heads and were following him around. There were musicians playing in the outside around the house. So he, being a good gentleman, opened the door and invited him in. Well, the musicians came up, marched up the steps, up the stairs, and disappeared. But they left their music, and the music played 24 hours a day. So, needless to say, they were going crazy. His sister-in-law, I believe, a Fabry, felt bad for him. So she went to the chapel and said a novena. And after the novenas, everything was all right. So he went and said, how can I thank you? And she said, well, just sit here and have coffee and roll and probably Belgian pie with me, and I'll tell you what you should do. You should build a chapel. And he said, okay, he had a dream and he knew exactly what his chapel was going to be, et cetera, et cetera. Well, in 73, I think? 1973. Now, the person who's driving this car probably thought, I know bad days and this was a bad one. He backed up over the chapel. And the next morning when they went to get the chapel and all the boards had cleared up, everything was gone. It was like it had never been there. So hence the ghost chapel. So that's my stories. Are there any questions? Do you have any? Yes.
That last one that was on the screen, where is that?
It is, okay, you take County C out of Brussels. No, don't ask the north, south, east.
But it's in Door County.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep, and it's very close. C has the whole county road C is interesting because there were 5 churches at one time. There was St. Francis Xavier. There was a Spiritualist Church, the White Star Church. There was the Precious Blood Church, the Episcopalian Church, and 2 Catholic churches, St. Joseph and St. John the Baptist. St. Joseph and St. John the Baptist were built on either side of the swamp. The people on this side of the swamp didn't want to go through the swamp to go to church. The people on this didn't want to do it either, so they built 2 churches. Well, St. John the Baptist did not do a good job surfing out the area. They went to bury their first parishioner. They had consecrated ground. And they went a little ways and boom, limestone. Went a little ways further, same thing. The whole cemetery that consecrated, they couldn't bury anybody because there was no ground. So they thought, what are we going to do? This is consecrated ground. We can't just let it be plowed. I know, we got stones. So they took their stones, built the wall all the way around the chapel, around the grounds. Some books say 4 feet, others say 6 feet. We filled it with ground, and it was called the Cemetery in the Sky. They would go up and bury their parishioners down. But again, they didn't think it through. You know what happens? Rosen, round, up, ground settled, and there were stories in the Advocate about farm dogs bringing home bones that were not necessary. So that cemetery is still there, but it's obviously not used. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Go on a tour and see the inside of the chapels. I just happened to give one. But we don't have a bus
you would have like get together with your friends, and my car, I cannot have people in my car because our insurance doesn't cover it, so I have people following me. And I could only keep track of 5 people. I was taking one last year and 4 people followed me. The 5th car went the other way. I said, what the? Everyone went that way. Why did you go the other way? But they knew we were going to meet at the Belgian light afterwards, so we followed.
How about another round of applause? So I know the program committee of the Door County Historical Society has talked about offering an actual tour of the chapels, and of course we would involve Barb in that as well, so stay tuned if that's something that would interest you and you'd like to actually go on a tour with us. Yes?
Did she say earlier that she also gives a talk on the fire?
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that, is there one coming up that I can go to, or?
Come on, Matt. These are questions I can't answer.
Yeah, I do it. I do it for private groups if they want me to come and talk to like a ladies group or whatever. But October 7th of this year, we have one yearly, which is October 8th is the day that the fire went through. And this year it's a Saturday. We don't interfere with the Packer games. So October 7th is when I'm going to do it. And we also have, at that time, have fire, I think he's a chief. Anyways, from Green Bay, that comes and explains. I do the more personal side because I dress in period costume, and I become my great-grandmother who survived the fire, her and her husband and their new 6-month-old baby, by going down into a well on their homestead. A well that was still there when I was growing up because my dad would say, don't go over there, there's still the well. And so it was an interesting part of my life. And this fire chief explains the real why it was so devastating to this little village of Williamsonville, which is now called Tornado Park, or Tornado. And he does the factual one, whereas I do the personal one. So it's October 8th, and there will be, WDR will have notices, and we put up posters. So, and our website, you can always, Belgian Heritage Center is a very nice website. You can go on and look up what we do, and different stuff about us. Any other questions?
All right, thank you very much.